Assessing the objectives for military intervention in Syria, but is there an appetite for attack? And are Western leaders stalling in the face of growing public opposition? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Well, as the arguments play out about the justification, legitimacy and legality of a military attack on Syria, another question is emerging. Is there a broader public appetite for intervention? A poll taken in the week of the chemical attack found that 60% of Americans were against US intervention, just 9% supporting it. And a survey in the UK this week found 50% of respondents opposed missile strikes, with 25% in favour. The balance of people in both those polls stating they just weren't sure. Straight then to our guests in New York, Richard Murphy, former US ambassador to Syria and Saudi Arabia, and former chairman of the Middle East Institute in Washington. Joining us via Skype from Dubai is Fadi Salem, a researcher on governance based in Dubai and commentator on Arab current affairs. And completing the panel in Oxford is Oliver Miles, former British ambassador to Libya and deputy chairman of the Libyan British Business Council. Welcome, gentlemen. Oliver Miles, UK's David Cameron has seemed to backtrack, but now in Parliament he's back on the offensive, making a passionate case for an imminent strike. What's happening here?
Things are changing very quickly, so it's difficult to answer your question. I think it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens in Parliament. As we speak, the debate is going on. There's a decision expected, or a motion expected to be passed later this evening. I think, coming back to what you were saying in the introduction, opinion in Britain is not at all keen on the idea of another military conflict in the Middle East. On the other hand, there's no doubt that the use of poison gas strikes a chord. It's regarded with horror, and I think the government's case that it can't simply be allowed to pass will find a lot of sympathetic hearing. So the question is there anything we can do which is effective, legal, safe, or not?
Back to talking about the public, you say that the majority don't want any sort of military action, and yet we haven't seen the same sort of passion and demonstrations that we saw in the streets over Iraq. Is that because people realize that their voices weren't heard?
Difficult to say. That may be part of it, but also I think because Parliament has been doing its job, whereas in the Iraq war, I think most members of Parliament who were members at that time, 10 years ago, must look back, if not with shame, at least with some regret that Parliament was so ineffective. Parliament was simply rubber-stamped a decision by the government. This time it's different. There was a debate in Parliament last month, which wasn't widely reported, which passed almost unanimously, I think 115 votes to 1 or something like that, a message to the government that they should not consider. At that time the issue was whether we should be arming the rebels, that we should not arm the rebels without further recourse to Parliament and a decision from Parliament. And I think that's encouraged members of Parliament to do their job properly. They should be holding the government to account. They should be examining the case for military action, and that's what they're doing.
Learning from past mistakes, possibly. Richard Murphy, we've seen the US backtrack just slightly. I mean, is this because of public perception or the realization of the potential horrors that any sort of strike on Syria could unleash?
I would second what Oliver Miles has said about the public atmosphere in the UK. It's comparable to that in the States. Is the administration backtracking? It would deny that, even slightly backtracking. As the President said last night, he has not made the decision to do anything militarily. But all the indications are that, as has been the case for the last several days, that it is a matter of only a few days before some action is taken. Now, in that time, he will carry out consultations with the Congress. They are to have contacts in the next several hours with congressional leaders. I don't believe they're going to be going down the road of seeking a congressional vote of approval, but they recognize they have to keep the Congress involved. And then he has the American public. He needs to go to the public with a clear explanation of the evidence that it has in hands of the culpability of the Assad regime in this attack. And it's not enough to simply assert, we know, and if you knew what we know, you wouldn't be questioning us. And he's not doing that. He's promised there will be a public explanation, and I think it would come again in the next day or so.
Fadi Salam, I'm going to come to you in a second, but let's talk a little bit more about what Obama has been saying. I mean, he previously said that Syria's use of chemical weapons would constitute what he called a red line. But in the same speech, Obama quickly diluted his comments, saying his calculus and his equation would change. And some of that hesitation was evident in his remarks on Wednesday. Let's listen.
If, in fact, we can take limited, tailored approaches, not getting drawn into a long conflict, not a repetition of Iraq, which I know a lot of people are worried about. But if we are saying in a clear and decisive but very limited way, we send a shot across the bow saying, stop doing this, that can have a positive impact on our national security over the long term, and may have a positive impact in the sense that chemical weapons are not used again on innocent civilians.
Now, contrast that with Obama's Secretary of State, John Kerry, who just a few days ago spoke in the strongest of terms.
What we saw in Syria last week should shock the conscience of the world. It defies any code of morality. Let me be clear. The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, the killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity. By any standard, it is inexcusable, and despite the excuses and equivocations that some have manufactured, it is undeniable.
Fadi Salam, how is this debate being viewed in this part of the world?
Well, it depends where you are, but in generally speaking, in Syria, not many people are having appetite for some sort of a military intervention that is on a large-scale major intervention. Definitely not around Syria. In the countries surrounding Syria, they are the most vulnerable in terms of being affected by outflow of refugees, maybe regional war, if there is a major strike. If there's a minimal strike or a slap on the hand for the regime, that could backfire actually and could empower the regime. This is what many Syrians view. Now, if that is all just a bluff and a pressure being put on the regime diplomatically, through the media, etc., that either you do this or that, or give concessions, or even get more acceptance by the regime to go into a political process that leads somewhere, for example, instead of forcing the regime change, changing it through a political process, which is highly unlikely, however, maybe more likely than a major strike that can cause the regime to fall and end up with a democratic state in Syria. So overall, I don't think many people, save along maybe the rebels, and that's a small part of the Syrian people today who are pro-military intervention.
How much dialogue is being had with the Arab League at the moment?
Generally, the Arab League has met, and most of the countries who, in the Arab states who have announced their stand on this, including Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, they have rejected that an intervention, of a military intervention, they're not in favor of. Primarily because they view this as something that will affect their countries negatively, whether it's a major strike that would drag them into their ramifications of war, or if it's a simple strike, could even empower the regime and backfire on the Syrian people and end up with a refugee crisis as well. So overall, not many people have announced in the Arab region the support even if there are support, even if there is support and people, countries are doing this under the table and announcing or sending the message that they're supporting a strike, nobody has came and said it publicly in a strong statement.
So, Richard Murphy, the US then cannot use the Arab League as an excuse to go in, can they?
I don't think it expected an excuse from the Arab League. I think it's too much to expect the Arab League to approve a Western, an American military intervention in an Arab country. The League has condemned the use of chemical weapons, and that, as a public statement, is about all I think that could be expected.
Oliver Miles, isn't this premature? We don't know yet who used these chemical weapons.
I think that's right. I think that the Prime Minister will have a great deal of difficulty carrying opinion in Parliament and in the country behind what he's just said. Of course, there's always a problem that governments have access to information, intelligence and so on, which they can't necessarily publish. But you have to remember the background of the Iraq War. 10 years ago, governments and opposition parties in Britain were strongly attached to the tradition that in times of war you have to support the government, you have to support the decision makers, you have to support the military people and so on. But there's a strong feeling that we were misled at that time, and that means that this debate is taking place in an atmosphere which has hardly, I think, ever existed before. People are very sceptical. It's not good enough to say we have intelligence. You've got to show what the intelligence is, and people won't accept that we know that Assad was responsible for this attack, because other plausible theories have been put forward which have not been disproved.
Fadi Salam, I mean, that's one of the concerns here, isn't it? The sort of backlash that might result from this if the intelligence isn't given. I mean, the shadow of Iraq overhangs everything that's going on here.
We have to question what is the objective of a strike or any military intervention if it takes place. Is the objective toppling the regime, like what happened in Iraq? I don't think even the U.S. has indicated that this could be an option, because mainly of the lack of alternatives and the fact that there are many Islamist groups, radical Islamist groups in the country who are the most powerful ones and filling every single gap that the regime is leaving. Is the objective is to provide a strong message to the regime? Well, I don't think that will work well, given that this regime is a brutal regime, irrational regime that doesn't react rationally to all the either initiatives or carrots or sticks that are provided to them. So people are skeptical, yes, in this region, and not many people I've talked to are optimistic about a good result for the Syrian people from a strike.
I mean, Richard Murphy, the House Speaker John Boehner asked Obama, he said, how potential military action will secure American national security interests, how will it preserve America's credibility, deter the future use of chemical weapons, and critically be part of our broader policy and strategy. I mean, how's Obama going to answer that?
Well, I think we'll be hearing a public answer in the next several hours in the course of the day. But he has addressed in part those concerns publicly already. As far as the strategic interest, he's pointed to the concerns in the neighboring countries of Lebanon, of Jordan, of Turkey about the situation, the burden they're carrying already with refugees, and there's been another surge apparently in the last few days. And their concerns that they could become a target for these weapons makes it a concern of the United States. Now, I don't think that's stretching things too far, but he certainly does have to come out with a more detailed explanation than has been made public to date.
Now, to back up what you're saying, the talk is that any military intervention, if it does go ahead, will focus on specific targets serving as more of a warning and would be over in days. Nevertheless, it's raising concerns of a wider regional fallout. Iran is warning of a disaster in the event of military action, describing the Middle East as like a gunpowder store. Israel has announced a call-up of security force reservists and stepped up its missile defenses. And sources within the Syrian army and also the armed Lebanese group Hezbollah have warned of retaliatory strikes against Israel if Western military intervention was to escalate. I mean, Oliver Miles, you can understand why there's so much debate about going in. I mean, you were ambassador to Libya, and it certainly raises the question or the flaws in the military action there, that there was no end game. I mean, we're still not sure what the game is here in Syria. Is there an end game? What is the overall aim?
That's something that worries me and worries a lot of people in Britain a lot. I think Ambassador Murphy will correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's an American saying that in war that the enemy have a vote, and the fact is that nobody can say for certain what will happen if America and Britain or America and other allies launch so-called surgical strikes, missile strikes against targets in Damascus. There may be silence, there may be some reaction which we are considering, there may be some reaction we haven't thought of. And military planning has to take all these into account. The first thing you have to do when you launch a military operation is define your objective very clearly. The second thing you have to do is work out how you're going to get out after you've achieved that objective.
And the objective at this stage, Richard Murphy, I mean, we're not sure what it is, but it seems the word coming from the US that it's not really out to harm the regime, but rather to focus on limited strikes. Wouldn't that play into Assad's hands?
No, I don't think necessarily so. I think that if, for example, and I'm speculating here, if it is aimed at military units that would provide an operational base for chemical attacks, then the lesson is don't do it again. But the second message is it is going to be limited. There is a desire to advance all of the parties to negotiations, and the talk of a limited campaign is also directed in part to Syria's supporters in Moscow and in Tehran. We want to see a political solution. We don't believe that a military solution is possible, so a limited military operation is intended to keep that door open for people eventually to move to the negotiating table, and they're still a long distance from that door.
Fadi, I mean, you know Syria well. While this debate continues about when to strike and what sort of strike it's likely to be, Syria could be preparing for this airstrike, couldn't they? We know that they are moving military hardware already.
Definitely. The regime will not sit idle, neither their allies. Now, I agree with Ambassador Murphy that the ultimate positive objective or outcome that can come out of either the threat with a strike or a minimal strike would be that a political process can be initiated with better probability of success. The other, this is a gamble. The downside of this is that it could actually, a small strike, could empower the regime by the regime portraying this as a win. We survived the U.S. and its allies striking us, and we're still here, and that could lead to a backfire. I mean, it can backfire in the Syrian conflict and empower the regime, which is already brutal enough. So this is a very tricky situation, and the smarter the way that the objectives and follow them rather than just react for the sake of reacting is better for everybody, especially for the Syrian people.
Oliver Miles, are we going to see Russia coming to the fore with some sort of suggestion on how to prevent this from happening? Because obviously they're going to be directly affected if any strike goes ahead.
Well, I'm not sure that it will work out quite like that, but I very much agree with what your other two guests have been saying about the importance of a political solution. And let's remember that America and Russia have already proposed that there should be a conference on Syria. Now, you don't have to be very cynical to say, oh, a conference on Syria, what's that going to achieve? Well, the answer is that the civil war will not be brought to an end without negotiation, and that means a conference or a series of conferences or a negotiation of some kind. And I just remind you that I think it's today week, isn't it? Next Thursday, there will be a high-level meeting, a summit meeting involving both America and Russia, the G20. I think that that will be another opportunity to try to keep this proposal for a conference on the rails and to perhaps give it a bit more momentum. I understand that there was to have been a meeting this week, a preparatory meeting which was cancelled or postponed by the American side because of the military crisis, because of this subject that we've been discussing just now. But let's bear in mind that actually negotiating for a political settlement of the civil war in Syria is far more important than dealing with isolated military incidents, however dreadful.
A political solution, I should imagine that would appease the majority of people who, Richard Murphy, are being asked, the public, to basically support a campaign that could kill more innocent people. It's a difficult ask, isn't it?
Every effort's going to be made not to have innocent people die in this chapter. 100,000 have already died. There's been far enough killing of Syrians over the past 2.5 years. Now, I think that the targets, if this comes off, that the targets chosen will be clearly military targets involved in this kind of operation and will be restricted. The weight of concern is considerable on the American administration to avoid civilian casualties. Now, that said, they always happen.
And the key to this, Fadi, is to send a strong message that the use of chemical weapons can never be tolerated.
I fail to see how there would be guarantees that they won't be used again by the same regime, if it's the regime who used it, and by others, even if a military strike did take place. Again, this is a very brutal regime and didn't react rationally to anything so far, and it could actually putting it back into the wall could lead to an unexpected reaction that affects either the Syrian people themselves or the region overall. Given that even military installation or security headquarters for the regime are in heavily populated areas, this is like a tactic by the regime since 40 years now, installing all these highly sensitive buildings inside heavily dense population area. So it's very tricky even to think that attacking these would end up with no civilian casualties. So it's very hard to say, but overall I think the Syrian people now are worried both ways. Either if a strike did take place or not, if it's minimal or it's major, they see that this will not be a positive outcome for them.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Richard Murphy, Fadi Salem and Oliver Miles. And remember, you can find this program on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And why don't you leave us your comments there too? I'm Jane Dutton. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.